Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. Check it out in the description. We've got a link there that will bypass the Apple upcharge, so it'll be $2.99 per month. Click all the way through, then pay for the monthly. Give it a shot. You can cancel at any time. You get access to 10 different channels, plus our stage shows. People want to know where you can get extra content from us. Well, I decided to go on a stage show when all this Jimmy Butler stuff happened on Christmas, and we gave it to our subscribers. So check it out. Again, it's Off the Floor, our Discord server, link right here in the description. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. It includes Underdog Fantasy. You can go to underdogfantasy.com. You can use the code 5FIVE. You get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. You can play up downs on players all the way across the sports spectrum, including your favorite Heat players, and much more on the app than that. So check it out. It's underdogfantasy.com. Very easy to navigate. Again, use the code 5FIVE. Get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be at least 18 or 19 in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 in Colorado for some games, 21 in Massachusetts or Arizona, and present in the state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncbgambling.org. And now, today's episode.
Down the bitch gang. Yikes. Five on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust.
You sound scared.
It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. We're coming to you on the day after Christmas. We were trying to give everybody the day off on Christmas and Hanukkah. That was the plan. It was the plan. A long history of this, Greg, in South Florida sports. I've had to cover Heat games on Christmas for a long time. I didn't really mind because that was relevant in the basketball perspective. You actually got to watch a game that the Heat were playing, and Heat, of course, were not featured on Christmas Day, which was one of the best Christmas days in NBA memory. Actually, all the games went the distance in terms of being competitive, but the Heat were in the news regardless. So we're going to talk again about another ESPN report regarding Jimmy Butler, again from Shams. Get into what he said, what it actually means, and I'm going to try to do this like a thesis paper and break it into the three categories and tell you in my terms, and you can comment on this as well, what the relevance is of all three parts, or what the relevance of his report was to all three parts. And then we're going to try to get into, in a preliminary way, what we think is going to happen now and what we think should happen now, which are two different things in a lot of these cases. And I want to make that clear to our listeners, because it doesn't seem to be clear to some who follow us on the Five Reasons Sports Twitter account, and we appreciate you for doing that, the 76,000 of you who do. But there's this, I think, lack of understanding that what I say is happening is what I think should happen. There's not always the same thing. I'm trying to report, and then we're trying to analyze. And these, again, are two different steps, just as there are three different parts, in my view, to what's actually going on with Jimmy Butler here. So let's start with a report, Greg, and then we'll go from there, because the words matter in these reports. The specific words that are used by the reporter, but also that are then embellished by the outlet. Okay, so the last time around that this happened, Shams had reported that the Heat were open to listening to offers, open to listening, keywords here, open to listening to offers, but also a list of teams that Jimmy Butler was interested in going to. Okay, this was the original report. A couple weeks ago, right? That kind of started all this. Although he didn't start any of this in reality, because we've been reporting on this and what was going on with it since Pat Riley's comments about Jimmy Butler, which are all the way back in last spring. Okay, and a lot of the things even that came out through the Herald report yesterday. I greatly respect Barry and Anthony, and I think a lot of people know that Barry and I have, we're the two that are really reporting this the most on Twitter, and that he and I have been aligned in the majority of our information. And no, we are not going to have a duel. Okay, this is not Hamilton or anything like that. We actually we have some sources in common. We have some that are not, but we are basically aligned on where this thing stands. Okay, and we have been for a while. But anyway, they had a report yesterday as well, and we'll get into that because they got into some things about Jimmy Butler that we've already said in certain places. And so I want to make sure that we haven't said them all on this podcast, and I want to make sure that they're clear there. But anyway, Shams reported before again that the Heat were open to listening, and that Jimmy Butler had interest in going to Dallas, Phoenix, or Houston. That was what was reported a couple weeks ago. Okay. Yesterday, he did advance it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because he didn't say that Jimmy was open to go, that the Heat were open to listening, or that the which the Heat, by the way, have already acknowledged. They've acknowledged that. I can tell you, and I've said that they're open to listening, and they are listening because that's what they do. They're going to listen to offers that are out there for various players. They don't. Oh no! Don't call me! Don't call me! Hang up the phone. Okay, no, that's not how this works. Okay, and having conversations is something that happens on a daily basis with teams around the league, and reporters make it out to be this big deal. But you have conversations. That's what you do. You want to know what's out there, just as Jimmy's agent would have to know what's out there for his player because he's trying to get an extension for his player. So another team has to know what his demands are going to be when he goes to a particular team before that player, before the team trades for that player, okay, and commits in some way to that player by sending stuff over. So anyway, this particular Shams report was that Jimmy Butler prefers, another key word here, prefers to be traded by the February 6th trade deadline. That is an advancement.
It is
one of the three areas, right? One of the three areas. And I'm going to break these areas down. Area one, Greg, is what Jimmy Butler wants, right? That's one category. So everybody put that to the side, okay? Second category is what other teams would be willing to do to get Jimmy Butler. In other words, what are their assets? What are they willing to offer? That's number two. I'm separating those two things because those are the only two things that Shams has ever talked about, okay? Third part of this, and the part of this that we've tried to fill in here specifically, is what the Heat are willing to do. What is their reaction to the other two parts? Part one, what Jimmy Butler wants. Part two, what other teams would do to acquire him. Part three, how the hell the Heat feel about that, and whether or not it's going to get them to do anything regarding this prior to the trade deadline. And I've reported over and over, okay, that the Heat's preference has been to take this into the offseason. And then we did another podcast where I reported that the Heat are open to a different kind of deal with Jimmy Butler, which is not the extension that he's wanted or wanted from them. And then there was later reporting that he doesn't want it. But that he's wanted, which is rip up this 1 year. He opts out.
Mm-hmm.
They rip up the 1 year. Okay, they give him essentially an extra $3 million for next year, and then he gets $58 million for the year after. So essentially, it becomes a 2-year, 113. I keep saying 111. My math is bad. 113 million extension for 2 years, but it's really a 1 year extension because they're ripping up next season. Okay. And I've said that one of the options that the Heat are open to or have been open to is giving him a longer deal, but at less per year, which gives them a little bit more flexibility. So maybe, and I'm just throwing out numbers right now. This is not a report, okay? But I threw out numbers in this. Could it be 3 for 115? Okay. So basically the same money, but it's over 3 years. And essentially the third year is a going away present for Jimmy, and then he's an expiring contract in that third year. Or again, you sit down at a table and maybe he wants more and thinks the market dictates more, and you come to a compromise of say 3 for 125 or 3 even for 135 on, say, I would say that would be the high end. Okay. And instead of, again, this 2 for 113 that we've discussed, I've said I haven't gotten into the number the Heat would be comfortable with, but that the Heat would be comfortable with that structure of a deal potentially. Again, if the two sides where there was some kumbaya here, where the two sides were actually getting along. I know you're right, which you're going to get into, and that's where I'm going to start to turn this stuff over to you. I'm just trying to lay all this out, okay? All right, so those are the three parts of this. So Shams' report again yesterday, to go back to it, is that Jimmy Butler would prefer to be traded by the trade deadline. But here's the thing: you had to actually click on the damn article. All right, because ESPN is sensationalizing his reports. I'm not. It's not.
Yeah.
Like the frustration that I know Bernie Lee, Jimmy's agent, had with Shams publicly, okay, which I know they don't have a great relationship. I've reported that before. But again, now even the Heat are not exactly sure what's going on there. All right, but I'll tell you that. But and it wouldn't be the first time because the Heat have had issues with agents who they've had good relationships with, and yet even
Part of
with
the game.
Thomas. Right. Okay. Right. So it's part of the game. Even with the late Henry Thomas, there were issues during the Dwayne negotiation and other negotiations that didn't necessarily get out, and in some cases may never get out. Anyway, ESPN has been sensationalizing these reports, and I mentioned that, like the Chiron a couple weeks ago on the screen was Jimmy Butler trade demand or trade request or something like that on the screen. Well, that's not even what Shams was saying, but they put that on the screen. And I'm I'm referencing that one specifically because they did it again this time, where they just posted on the tweet that this part about Jimmy Butler would prefer to be traded, but in the second paragraph of Shams' article on the website, if you actually click through it, it says there Jimmy Butler has not made a formal trade request. Okay, and I want to be clear on something with trade requests. Yes, the CBA. The new CBA, there is a fine. I believe I forgot the exact number. There is a fine
for making a trade request in the media. Yep.
In the media, publicly. There's not a fine for doing so to the team privately. Okay. And so it matters that he hasn't made a formal trade request. And I can tell you he hasn't made a formal trade request because as soon as I saw the article, I went and vetted that. And no, he has not made a formal trade request. So again, let's put into context, because I'm going to leave it to you a lot of this on what they should do. Okay. But let's put into context what has actually been reported and by others, and then by me and by Barry and the others who are following this story. Okay. That he has apparently expressed to somebody, okay, that has gotten back to Shams, because Shams is sure of this story. I will tell you, there is somebody close to Shams, and I've been told this by friends of mine who work in the ESPN NBA side. There's somebody close to Shams who is absolutely 100% dead sure and has been for a while that Jimmy wants out. I'm just telling you, like there is somebody, he's getting this source from somewhere. Okay. Now I know people are saying, well, the agent's telling him. Again, the agent seems to, and I know the agent has not been a fan of Shams, and I knew that before all of this came out. But maybe he's talking to other people who are talking to Shams. I don't know, but it's getting somehow somebody close to Jimmy, doesn't have to be the agent, but anyway, is this information. I don't think Shams is just out there flat out lying. Okay.
Not anymore.
He's hearing this. Right. He's hearing this from somebody. Okay. That Jimmy would prefer to get out. Okay. But Jimmy hasn't made a formal trade request. So let me give you the third part of this, and then I'm going to break, and it's all yours. Okay. The third part of this is what the Heat would do. Right. So we've established, number one, now that there seems to be at least some. It's hard to ignore the noise that
Correct.
Jimmy, who we knew, right, who we knew was frustrated by not getting the contract extension. We have said all along that's an issue between the two parties. And by the way, I'm getting to this in the 13th minute of the episode. Jimmy Butler's doubtful again. Okay, with now it's a return to competition. What is it? Competition.
Return to competition conditioning, essentially.
Like, one. Okay. All right, so he's going to miss, most likely in Orlando, his 8th out of 28 games this season, which puts him on a pace to play under 60 games this year, when the number one reason that we can say whether chicken or the egg or the chicken, whatever you want to say, okay, but the number one reason that the Heat didn't want to extend him this year was because he wasn't available enough. And he's on pace to be less available than last season. Okay, so we can say now that, well, people will say, well, he's being less available because of what's happening with the Heat, and he's frustrated with his contract. But regardless of what it is, okay, what the press conference that pissed him and his team off, which we talked about on that night, that when Riley talked about him not being available enough, it didn't lavish praise on him like he's lavished praise on him for the past 5 years or whatever. Okay, the basic core of that press conference was lack of availability. And for whatever reason, whether it's all legitimate, okay, or whether, I know Heat fans are skeptical about this now. I was told by people inside the organization that he has been getting IV treatment. So at least they're not denying that there's something here. I saw him turn an ankle. A lot of people saw him turn an ankle. I don't know if you would be, and I'm not, please don't aggregate this. I'm just saying, like, I understand why people would be like, well, wait a second, maybe they're protecting an ankle injury because to preserve trade value. Maybe who knows, okay? But the reality is, okay, that he hasn't been available, okay? Which, if you want to validate Pat's view on this, it kind of validates Pat's view that you have a star player who wants to be paid the max, who plays basically at most 2 out of every 3 games, right? Okay. So that's where that is at. So the third part of this, though, okay, again, the first part, Jimmy, seems to be some kind of issue with being with the Heat right now, regardless of what he said publicly or what people around him have told me repeatedly. Okay, there seems to be something. I can't deny it. Okay, it's a constant drumbeat. The number 2 part of this is what other teams would do, and I'll tell you on that. Okay, the Heat have, to my knowledge, okay, and I woke up not that long ago, so I'll check it out. Still not received an offer for Jimmy Butler. Okay, so this whole thing about what other teams would be willing to do. Okay, we've talked about the teams that conceivably would be interested. Alex and I did a podcast on this almost 3 weeks ago. We listed like 9 different teams. The media has now caught up to all of them. But again, until there's an actual offer, we can speculate. Houston has players that may be attractive. They've come out publicly and said they're not doing anything. It doesn't mean that they won't. Okay, but the Phoenix, yes, it seems to be the most noise that Phoenix wants him, and they have what appears to me to be a shitty deal that the Heat wouldn't want. Okay, because unless the Heat are flat out lying to a whole bunch of us, they don't want Bradley Beal any more than they wanted him last year, and they didn't want him last year. All right, and I don't know what team's going to take Bradley Beal. We did a whole podcast on that. What team's going to take Bradley Beal in a 3-way deal? Okay, he has an onerous contract right now. Yes, he can be a good player at times. He was yesterday. But he has an onerous contract right now. And why are you going to pay Bradley Beal, but you wouldn't pay Jimmy Butler? He's not that much more available than Jimmy Butler is at this point. And yes, he's younger, but he's not better.
And he's redundant with Tyler Hero, who is now finally ascending into that level of player. So that one makes particularly no sense.
Right. Okay. So then the other ones that are discussed, Golden State. We saw yesterday they don't look like a championship contender as constructed, right? They're trying. Steph still has his moments as he had yesterday. Okay. But their offer, which apparently to my knowledge has not come, would include basically probably Wiggins' contract, which is kind of a neutral asset. They do have a couple of picks that they could trade, which, by the way, Phoenix does not. Phoenix, we're talking about a pick in 2031. We're talking about basically a 7th grader or an 8th grader or something along those lines.
They have their 2025 pick, Golden State does. Key point.
They do, which is something that the Heat may be interested in, okay. But they apparently still to this point no offer, and an offer would likely include Kuminga, who's a player that you listen to Warriors fans, they're not thrilled with, doesn't seem to really fit with the Heat in terms of his issue seems to be defense primarily, and you need to re-sign him to a big deal to make the thing worth it, okay? And then some of these other teams have been speculated, the Lakers, the Clippers, Memphis, San Antonio. I mean, nobody's made an offer, okay? And as far as cap space at the end of the season, the only team that's guaranteed to have enough cap space to make something happen is Brooklyn. And we don't hear about them getting involved now. They have the cap space afterwards. But as we've talked about, one option after the season for the Heat, okay, is that Jimmy Butler wants to go somewhere else, is still with the Heat at that time, opts out of his contract, and the team he wants to go to does not have space, and then the Heat would recoup conceivably some kind of an asset. Probably wouldn't be as good as they would now. I get that, okay? Some kind of an asset for accommodating him in a sign and trade to get him where he wants to go, which is another reason, and I'll get to this is the third part, and then we're going to break, and it's yours. The third part of this is, even with what happened yesterday, even with the Shams report, because they have received no offer to this point, because they are comfortable, okay, taking this into the offseason and even losing Jimmy for a small asset in a sign and trade, or even for nothing. We're going to repeat that. Even for nothing, except for the flexibility under the apron and other cap mechanics that Jimmy Butler's contract for next year and in the future, because again, if he opts in, they got to pay him next year. Even if they just get that flexibility with his money going away, they are, at least from what they're putting out there, okay with that. Okay. All of that leads to this. Okay. What I was told yesterday is, quote, from the Miami Heat, I get to this in the 20th minute, we feel no pressure to do anything. So, in other words, all of this noise, the Shams that ruined Christmas and Hanukkah, and probably a few other holidays that people were celebrating yesterday, it did not move the Heat. So the first two parts of this, what Jimmy wants, what other teams may do, yes, they are listening to it, okay? Open to listening to it, yes, okay? But again, as of this moment, it's not pushing them to do anything, which is, in my view, the story. I'm going to go to you because you have a different perspective on this now, and we're going to discuss that. I'm sorry for taking so long, but I think people needed to hear that whole thing. Do want to tell you about a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at what do we do? Oh, what we do? You break? Yeah, you break Wheel Fix. It's with a U at the start. YouBreakWheelFix.com. I shouldn't have. Mark and his team, they'll take good care of you there. Again, if you need your wheels fixed, polished, you want the powder coating, you want them to look real cool, whatever it is you want. Based in North Miami, they actually moved to a bigger shop not that long ago to accommodate all the people that we're sending them that are happy. Use the code. Well, you don't even need to use the code. Just mention 5 Reasons, 5 on the floor. You get 5.5% off your next order. So again, it's YouBreakWheelFix, YouBreakWheelFix.com. Check them out in North Miami. Say hello again to Mark and his team, and just tell them what you want. They will do a great job for you. And again, you can check them out on Instagram as well at YouBreakWheelFix, or go to YouBreakWheelFix.com. Greg, in light of all that, you think the Heat should feel pressure to do something, correct?
Yes, I do. For a number of reasons. And just to kind of recap some of what you mentioned and put my spin on it, you're right in that they're sensationalizing their own articles, because they actually even reference Inside Pass, which I guess is the name of the show that Shams said the initial information on December the 10th, which is also noted in the article, that they're willing to listen to trade offers, right? Like they're open to listening. But this is different, because now they're saying he prefers a trade out of Miami. No formal trade request, but it's believed he's ready for his exit, is what the article says. And then there's also a part of it where they kind of allude to that both team and player may be willing to kind of split. And they talk about the Heat, and this is where it gets kind of nasty. It's like, it says the Heat's efforts to land star power around Butler and Adebayo have failed, including losing out on Dame, Durant, and Kyrie Irving in recent years. That's all has the devil's in the details on some of that stuff. But the fact that that's getting thrown in the national conversation, I just think this is getting messy and weird. The Heat don't typically operate, and I've said this from the beginning, I know that this isn't necessarily a negotiation through the media, but because like it was Christmas Day, and basically what teed up every game of the day was this story. Like for the entire day, there wasn't a ton else that went on. And so for them to really position it like Jimmy prefers a trade out, and then like, listen, I'm not the conspiracy theorist at all, but it is a little weird that we saw him turn his ankle and he's been sick, but like that this news drops as he's out with weird injury designations that don't feel super specific to what we've seen take place recently. It's just weird timing. It may be nothing, and I may look stupid for even connecting those dots, but to me, it's an interesting moment. It talks about Butler wanting a win now contender, which implies that the Heat are not that. And I think we've all kind of acknowledged that, but I think that this is now putting the Heat in a position where I don't know, like they don't like to have any season basically like fall out of favor, and like you don't want to waste a season. This is getting in that weird zone where they're a losing streak away, an argument away, another media report away from this getting messier. And I just think that that's where we've gotten to this part where, like you said, not everyone in that locker room listens to Five on the Floor, but they definitely they get the Dunk Central updates. Shams referencing all the failed attempts feels like he's just basically taking the Dunk Central update and turning it into an article. And now you're at this place where they're saying Jimmy prefers to be elsewhere. I don't know how the team absorbs that, how they react to that. There has to be conversations internally about what that means. And to me, I just think at some point you have to read the room enough to say it's time to look and see what you can get. I think they're going to maximize their return if they do it sooner rather than later. And that's where they got to start listening. I don't know that Phoenix, Golden State, Dallas, Houston, the teams that are noted that he's open to, the Phoenix one is weird, and watch, that'll be the one where it's you get Beal in a 2031 first and you feel good about adding a pick. Just because we've said it makes no sense in the way the world works, that'll be the one that happens. I still lean Golden State. I feel like that's the one. And they're just not going to be able to avoid the noise. That's what I want to reinforce, is that this is not a thing where it's just a loud faction of transaction Twitter, for instance. And so I just think that the Heat as an organization are going to have to balance how they react to this news, and then also the reality of how the team reacts to it. And I just don't see this being a thing where, because we've also said that they don't have a pathway where you see a current, okay, that's the way that they could contend and salvage the year. It just feels like we're careening toward the most likely scenario being them getting offers at the deadline, people saying, okay, the Heat are going to move on, and by the 6th. So they haven't gotten any, he hasn't requested a trade. They haven't gotten any offers, but it's not February 6th yet. And I think that that's the key to this. And I think he'll end up getting moved. That's my gut feeling, not based on any intel. We've reached the level here. It's kind of time has run out on the scenario is what it feels like.
Well, I'll tell you that most Heat fans agree with you. Because I polled it yesterday, and obviously this has more interest than anything the Heat are doing on the floor, which I want to cycle back to that, because I think that matters in all of this. Because one thing you're saying is, that I get, which I typically would take this perspective, is, you don't want to waste the season. I think that's where the season is headed anyway. So I actually, it makes it less pressing to me, because okay, so this blows up in terms of the locker room. So what? This team wasn't winning a championship this year anyway. So that's kind of where I've come to on this. But I will tell you, the majority of the fans agree with you. They think he's going to get traded. Okay. I still don't. Now, again, these are two different arguments. We have to split this stuff up too, because this gets conflated. What I think they will do and what I think they should do may not necessarily be the same thing. But I just think they're dug in. That's my sense of it at this point, because again, they're in the driver's seat in this situation. They are, and that's why I think you're hearing this noise. Because if you read Shams's reporting on this, it's clear it ain't coming from them. Okay.
No,
it's coming from people around Jimmy. That's where this is coming from. All right. Because the stuff that he's saying, when you're specifically mentioning players that the Heat have missed out on, but you're ignoring what they did for Jimmy, then you're taking a very particular perspective. And also, we do have to mention some of these aggregation sites like Dunk Central have a perspective. You and I know, I'm not going to air it, okay? But there is a perspective from that particular account that the Heat have not done enough. Okay, there's going to be an echo chamber there. So it's a little bit of inside baseball where I'm not going to go too far inside. The thing on this is, when you're mentioning specific players, okay, missing out on, what was it, Dame,
Kyrie,
Harden,
and KD.
Oh, KD. Okay. All right. Should we do that quickly here without people saying I'm carrying water for the front office? I want to start on this, okay? I used to be known as a players guy. So this idea that I carry water for the front office is kind of funny. Again, if you go back to the whole Dwayne situation. So this isn't about carrying water. I'm just trying to report what I've heard, seen, etc. in this case, and what their perspective is, because I think I do have more of a handle on it than, say, Shams does. All right, first part of this is, As far as Dame goes, we've how many what did we do? 58 podcasts on that. I mean, did Cronin pick up the phone? What are we doing there? Like, we're gonna go back and relitigate that situation? Yes, he wanted Dame. You and I both talked about it. We understood that he wanted them to add Dame. By the way, if they added Dame, they wouldn't have Tyler right now. Now, again, Heat fans, and I understand this perspective, will say, well, you should have moved Tyler anyway, even with Tyler popping this year. And we've talked about how this is a classic scenario where by the time that a player elevated to a certain level, this happened with Timmy and Zoe, it happened with the Dolphins with Zach and Jason and Dan Marino, where the younger player pops, but the other player is not at the same level consistently as he used to be, and so it doesn't work out. So we could say the Heat have ended up being right on Tyler and that there was more there, but it may have taken too long to accommodate this particular build. Okay. You wouldn't have Tyler if you traded for Dame. That's just there was no way to make that trade. We went through a whole bunch of different mechanics on that, and it was very difficult to pull that off. They didn't want Tyler anyway because Cronin's an idiot. Okay, sorry. And so, but the point is that he wouldn't negotiate with them. So okay, we're gonna pin that one on them, I guess. But again, that's because that's a national media fable that because again they all followed Woj on that one, okay, with his moleskin notebooks, and he was carrying water for Cronin. All right, so we've discussed that.
Don't settle.
Don't settle. Durant. I mean, they've made runs at Durant over and over. They thought they had Durant prior to Jimmy. They thought they had Durant in 2000. Well, they didn't think they had him. They made a hell of a pitch to Durant in 2016. They finished second to Golden State. This is pre-Jimmy. Okay, they finished second to Golden State. Okay, because he wanted to win a championship because that was on his mind. And since they had Jimmy, they have made runs at Durant. We talked about it. What was 3 summers ago? I don't think they've ever been in the best position to get Durant. Right? I mean, they've never been in the driver's seat and fumbled Durant. I don't think they look. You don't think Pat wanted Durant? Come on, okay. And the other one, Kyrie, I don't really know the circumstances of that one. That one's been brought up recently. I know that's been blamed on things, by the public, on things that, the whole Kyrie controversy, and the Heat wouldn't want to get involved in that. If they were really in on Kyrie, I will admit that one is kind of unfamiliar to me in terms of what exactly played out there.
They came out at that time. They came out and said, we are not trading Kyle Lowry, which basically put the Kyrie pursuit to bed in that moment. And so I think like that is where, and also like he was in a weird place from a public perception perspective at that time. So it's like now he's kind of that cloud has gone away. But this is the just thing I want to sneak in here is like think back through Heat history. How many guys openly say in the media that they don't want to be there, but the Heat just keep them around anyway? And so that's just where I think it's interesting to hear you say that you don't think a trade will happen, because I just can't remember a guy getting that out in the media unless he refutes it at some point. I know he hasn't made a trade request, but this feels like a passive aggressive way of breaking up a little bit.
Well, I'll say this, okay? Even if he refutes, I want to go back to the Kyrie thing in a second, and Lowry thing, because that's the part that is just getting totally skipped over here. Even if he refutes it publicly at this point, I don't even think everybody's going to believe him. I think we're at the point now where Shams has doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on that. Now Bernie's gone silent publicly. Hasn't, and I know I didn't try to reach out to him, but I know that the Herald reported that he's not discussing this. So even if Jimmy comes out, what Jimmy has to do first thing is play. Okay, until he plays, then all of the conspiracy theories are going to be out there, right? But even if he does play and he comes out and says, "Oh, I want to be with the Heat," I think there's going to be a lot of eye rolling at this point. There's too much evidence on the other side. So I'll get to your perspective on that in a second. But as far as, again, the Kyrie Lowry thing, I don't know if it was specifically that they wouldn't trade Lowry, that was the only time. But I will say this about the Lowry thing, because I know that the Heat did have a view that Kyrie had been problematic in a bunch of different places. It wasn't just the the controversy, the anti-Semitism charges and all that kind of stuff. It was also that he was difficult. Okay, I covered him in Cleveland for a year. Okay, he was difficult there. Okay, he was difficult, and we know what happened with the Nets. So it wasn't just that, and I think that when I talked to somebody with the Heat on this, they were kind of surprised that it worked out so well in Dallas. I think a lot of teams were. There weren't a lot of
Everyone
teams
was a
that were willing to.
surprise. Yeah.
Right. So okay, but Kyle, we need to do this for 60 seconds again because I am not. Look, Jimmy Butler raised this franchise from the dead. Okay, we did a million. Jimmy Butler, to me, I have him as the third most important player in Miami Heat history. Okay, so this is not Jimmy Butler denigration here at all. He wanted Kyle Lowry. They got him Kyle Lowry. Now, I know Heat fans are saying out there, well, he was the only free agent. They didn't have to go sign him. And I know they did not really want to give him the third year. They gave him the third year to get him because there was competition for his services. In fact, remember, they made a run at Kyle the previous trade deadline, but Masai didn't want to trade him at that point to them. And that's why the Heat pivoted to Oladipo with 10 minutes left before the deadline.
And Jimmy didn't love that, by the way.
I know, I get it. But like, again, he wanted Kyle and they eventually got Kyle and they overpaid Kyle. And yes, I know that Kyle was effective, particularly when Jimmy and Bam were hurt during that season. All right. And they ended up with the 1 seed with Kyle. He added certain things. But I also know he never really acted like he wanted to be here. And I'm not saying that from a media perspective because he was difficult with us. I'm saying the highest levels of the organization will tell you that Kyle never acted like he actually wanted to be here. And that having Kyle around was actually negative in terms of Jimmy's attitude with the team. I've been told that too, that it's like this, the two of them together all the time. There was a separation with the rest of the team. And it didn't, let's just put this, it didn't work out, okay, ultimately. Yes, they did get a 1 seed that 1 year. It didn't work out. They were looking to move him. And then not only, we talked about it last year, they had this expiring contract. And you and I both wanted Kyle gone enough, and the organization apparently agreed that they traded this asset and another asset, a first-round pick, for Terry Rozier, who now, again, that hasn't worked out. So because of this one error, which was giving Kyle that deal, which Jimmy wanted, they then had to compound the error. We can say they didn't have to, but ultimately they did, compounded the error by then giving up another asset along with that contract, which now limits their flexibility and limited it this past summer, limited in some ways going forward because they could not recoup a first-round pick now for Terry Rozier at this point. So, and all of this traces back to Jimmy Butler wanting Kyle Lowry, who they gave him. So I keep coming to this because this is a very one-sided perspective because again, none of this is coming from the Heat's perspective. And if it sounds like I'm tilted towards the Heat, I'm not. I'm trying to balance what's going on here on the other side, which is not reflective of their view of reality in a lot of these cases at all. Because if you just want to put a big picture and say they didn't get enough help for Jimmy Butler, I understand how fans can make that point. Okay, yeah, he took a team with undrafted free agents basically, and bam, okay, to the finals, right? And another year he took him to the.
No, it's that like I just have to say that this Jimmy Butler era, if we are coming to the close of it, and I know we'll probably do a whole show about this kind of stuff, it has been such a successful era.
Doing 20 shows. Yeah.
So I have nothing else to do. The fact that anyone talks about organization or player failing in either direction in any facet, I think it loses track of like just how good this run has been and how much they've exceeded expectations over and over again. So I just think that deserves its proper place in this conversation as well. And that's why Shams coming out and explicitly naming the players they didn't meet, it's getting messy. And that's where like you and I differ in terms of that. I think a trade should happen sooner rather than later, because I don't see how this gets cleaned up.
Well, I'll say this about it getting messy, because as I say, Shams is reporting that side, right, clearly. Which is funny because he's reporting aside. I mean, the agents made it clear he doesn't like Shams, and yet Shams is throwing out a bunch of stuff that would be very supportive of the agent's case, which is that the Heat never did enough for this guy and all the rest of this. And again, I come back to the Kyle Lowry thing, which even people around Jimmy who pushed for the Heat to get Kyle later apologized to the Heat for that push. Okay? So again, if we want to look at it like they haven't done anything for him, it restricted their ability to do other things, as did other circumstances. But also, the report from Anthony and Barry yesterday, it was Anthony's story, I believe, about some of the things with Jimmy, would be sort of, I would think would be more positive towards the organization, right? And this one came out, so I do want to just mention it because I posted about this the day I heard about it, which I guess was the day after it, that Jimmy didn't go to the Christmas party this year, right? Like this is this whole thing, right? I feel like we're in a soap opera. Jimmy didn't go to the Christmas party, which was
the
at
only
Pat's
one that
house.
didn't go.
The only one, which I, by the way, reported the day after it, which was I think what was last like 4 days ago. Okay, like we a few of us around the team knew this, and I also said this on Off the Floor. This is why I recommend you subscribe to Off the Floor because we don't have time to just go down podcasts immediately. Sometimes I put stuff up there that it was not that unusual, and people shouldn't read that much into it. But I was reporting it because I said this is going to become an issue. It's going to get reported somewhere else, and then it's going to blow up into something else. But the reality is Jimmy doesn't go to a lot of stuff and hasn't in 6 years. Okay. And the Heat just kind of throw their hands up about it. Like, and this is part of what I say, like managing him is different than managing any other player they've ever had, including Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Alonzo Mourning, Tim Hardaway, Goran Dragic, and lots of other players who either are Hall of Famers or are borderline Hall of Famers. Okay, this has been the case. Jimmy has been different to manage. He's had different rules than these other players. I can never remember another player staying at other hotels on the road. Okay.
No.
Right. I cannot remember another player who kind of talks to the media when he feels like it after games or not. And it has set a precedent now in that room. Okay. And we've also talked about sort of the burden that is on, it seems like it's on Bam to do all of the media, all of the community stuff and all of that. They have let certain things go with Jimmy because it's been worth it. It's been worth it. Okay. And again, that's part of the package. And that's what another team is getting, by the way, if they want him. And that's why I say there's a limited number of teams that have the infrastructure to be able to make it work with Jimmy Butler. And the Heat have been that team, really, because it's worked better with the Heat than anywhere else. He didn't get to a finals anywhere else. Okay. Right. Okay. He was the best player on that Philadelphia team in that postseason, but he didn't get to a finals anywhere else. Yes, he turned around Minnesota and all the rest of that, and they got to the postseason. But it has been, as you said, a symbiotic relationship. It's like when people talk about LeBron and LeBron lifted the Heat to these heights. Well, also the Heat were the first team where LeBron ever got to those heights, right? So when things are successful, both parties are responsible. When things aren't successful, typically both parties are responsible. And in this case, both parties are responsible. In the macro, yes, the Heat have not gotten Jimmy a star to play with. Okay, yes, we can talk about specific circumstances, but the reality is I can't deny that. But also, Jimmy hasn't been as available to play of late. Okay, and regardless of what's happening off the floor, if he was available for 70, 75 games and playing at a high level, the team would be better, and none of the shit behind the scenes would really matter. So cycling back to this, okay, and missing this Christmas party, I don't think is any big deal because Jimmy misses all that shit. We can argue about, or not all of it, but a lot of it. We can argue about whether or not that should have been happening all these years, or they should have made different rules for him. But Jimmy didn't show up for the Dwayne stuff. So it's not just people are saying, well, he didn't show up because he doesn't want to be at Pat's house. I mean, Dwayne's the guy who got him here, right? Supposedly.
It's all the stuff adding up in the same moment. It's in the aggregate. It's getting people to start looking at it. And that's the interesting part is that I don't know that the Heat, and I know that the Heat internally don't care about the optics, but this is one where I think the optics are going to matter as we move forward towards the deadline.
Right. And Greg, I get it. And now we'll close this by getting to the should do, will happen, should happen. But I think the problem here is a lot of these things are things that are going on all along. But you're right. Now people are saying it's cause and effect, right? He doesn't show up at the party because he's upset about the contract. He's missing time because he's upset about the contract. Well, he hasn't shown up at parties and he's missed time before all this shit.
Yeah. When he got an extension.
So, right. Like this whole thing comes down to one thing. If they wanted to give him his money, okay, there would be problems behind the scenes because there always were minor things that they would have to manage, but it would not be this kind of story. If he'd gotten his money, that was it. The Heat didn't feel at that point, and they still don't feel, by the way, that they wanted to do the 2 years for $113 million, even if it was just ripping up the 1 year and it was really a 1 year extension. They didn't want to do it. They wanted to see him be available first and playing at a high level. And now, again, the problem is that he's kind of proven Pat's point by he's not been available enough. And whether or not some of that is because he's frustrated with the organization or some of it is just the natural course of events, he hasn't been available enough. And so they're not moved to extend him. Like, none of this is leading towards an extension. Okay. No. And at this point, I don't think it's leading towards what I had suggested on a previous episode that I know they were open to, which is an extension of a different sort, which is this, sort of 3-year, $125 million or whatever it is. It doesn't seem like it's leading there. So I'll put this on the record. I don't think he's back next season. Okay. That's where I'm at. But I'm not necessarily with you that I think they're going to trade him. Does that make sense? Okay. And so I'll ask you this, because now I'm going to question you. And I know we're going long on this, but this is all anybody cares about anyway with this team. Okay. You say they should because it's going to become too much of a circus. What is your concern with it becoming a circus this year? Because do we think this year is amounting to anything anyway?
No, but I know the Heat don't think like that. Like, they're not going to say, well, we've got all these games left and we're just going to punt all of them. I mean, if they do that, then it should be followed up with multiple transactions that would really accentuate and accelerate that process. If you're to me, I just don't see them punting on a season. And also, like, we say all this, and I know that they're only a game above 500, but they're out of the play-in. They're in the 6th seed right now, I think. And so it's a situation where they're going to probably be able to navigate this and still be competitive enough to be a playoff team in the hunt, as the Dolphins perpetual graphic always says. They'll be in the hunt. And I think that being in the hunt is enough for them to get through the season. There's a part of this where Jimmy now, because this has made it onto ESPN and Shams is doubling and tripling down, I just don't think that noise is going to be something that they want to handle for the rest of the season, because I don't see it getting better. I see that this is likely going to get louder. The pressure is going to mount. I know right now they don't feel that pressure, but as February 6th approaches, they may also get offers that you have to really think about, and getting a pick in this upcoming draft would be nice. Clearing the decks for 2026 would be nice. So you also have to prioritize those things. So maybe a deal doesn't show itself, but I really think that this is one where being more proactive than reactive is probably going to maximize what you get back. And I don't see that philosophy of saying, well, this is a sunk season anyway. Like, that would just be very atypical of how the Heat would approach a season. Am I wrong?
No, you're right about that. That's not how they would typically approach it. I mean, maybe that's more my perspective. But I don't see the noise pushing them to do something. I really don't, because I mean, the only thing that would push them to do something is totally counterproductive for Jimmy. Like, the only thing that would push them is he literally does not show up. Like, that this thing, like I mean, he has the
right
longest.
Now?
Well,
I'm joking.
But I mean, like, I'm assuming that he's going to play here at some point. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, then maybe in a week he's still not playing. Okay, and it's still murky. And the Heat, we know, are not particularly forthright about ailments and injuries to begin with, even when it benefits them to be so. And so maybe this does go on for another week or something along those lines, and that's kind of where we're at. But I keep coming back to this, like. But to really make it uncomfortable for the Heat, Jimmy Butler has to kill his own earning power. I mean, it's one thing to do what he did in Minnesota, right? And we laugh about it looking back at it. He's going to go win with the third stringers and all of, Jeff Teague's talk about it on his podcast, and and everything that went on there. Rachel Nichols shows up, and the Wolves players are watching an ESPN interview with Rachel Nichols in the locker room. Okay, and all the rest of this. Like, it's one thing to do that to Minnesota, which has no credibility, had at the time no credibility as an organization. It's another thing. Well, okay, and this is not me sunshine pumping the Heat, but there's not love for the Heat around the NBA. Trust me, there is not. Okay, it's one of the reasons it's very difficult for them to make deals. But there is respect, at least. Yeah. There's respect. So if you're gonna seriously like basically bail on the entire situation. Plus, you're not 28. You're 35. You're looking for max money, and you're just going to go disappear on a team. I mean, like, in what way does that help your earning power and get you what you want, which is what this has been about all along, which is money? Like, is the Phoenix owner like that reckless that he's going to say, well, it's just Jimmy being Jimmy, and okay, we don't care about the luxury tax anyway, and we're already paying Durant and Booker, so we're gonna maybe he'll find one, maybe they want him that badly. I mean, that would be malpractice on their end, I would think. Like
Jimmy doesn't need any more box scores that are other than the Detroit game, so he's just leaving that one up there because that'll be the way that all these organizations will talk themselves into making the big move.
Maybe, but again, if he, I don't know. To me, if he disappears here, if he makes this really ugly, I think it starts to hurt him. So in the Heat's perspective, like, I don't think there should be concern about that. So I don't think they're going to be moved to do this because of noise. I don't. I think the only thing that would move them to do this is if a number of teams get involved. And so they end up getting an asset they were not expecting to get out of this thing because there's competition for Jimmy's services at this stage. That's the only thing. I just don't anticipate that happening because I'm looking at I think it has to be almost a team that we haven't talked about a lot or Houston, like, starting to get serious about it. And I don't really see a reason why Houston, other than Jimmy being from that area, like, why they don't feel to me like they're at that stage where they start to do that. But that would be the one team. I have said Golden State is the most likely because, again, getting somebody to pair with Steph. So maybe it is Houston or Golden State. But I don't think what's currently been talked about from Golden State would be enough to move the Heat. I could be wrong. Maybe Wiggins, Kuminga, 2 first-round picks, and then you can move the first-round picks to do something else. Maybe Barry mentioned using Kuminga as an asset that you send somewhere else. Again, he's got to be re-signed. So this is not a clean transaction, right? I mean, and this is a guy who's been in and out of Steve Kerr's doghouse, and Spo and Kerr just work together. I mean, I'm sure Spo will know what the flaws are with Kuminga. I'm sure it's been discussed. They were together a lot, for the Olympic team. So I don't know about that one. And then we've talked about teams like Memphis. I don't know. I don't even know a team in the East that would pop up here. I mean, Brooklyn with the cap space, but they're not going to do it right now. Like, so who are we talking about? But to me, it would have to be a couple of these teams get in the mix, and the Heat just there's the added advantage to we don't have to deal with this anymore. But the real thing is we're getting some kind of an asset that can kind of kickstart us to the next phase. But they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't with the fans. And that's the way it's going to play out. Because if they hold this out to the offseason and Jimmy ends up, even needing them for a sign and trade, and they recoup a second-round pick back, people are going to say, well, they should have made the trade at the deadline without really understanding what was available at the deadline. We're going to go through this same thing again. My lean, Greg, is I understand your perspective on it. I understand fans' perspective on it. Just get this thing over with. Send Jimmy to where he wants to go. Please do not equate this to Portland sending Dame to where he wants to go. It's a different circumstance. I could do a whole podcast on that too. But I still think they're dug in enough, and I just don't think they're going to be bullied in this situation into making a bad transaction. I don't.
I think a team ponies up a good offer. That's the thing, is that I think before February the 6th, someone is going to give the Heat an offer that they will be inclined to review and really think about, because I don't think that they'll be able to get the same thing in the opt-out sign and trade scenario.
So, final question is: would Wiggins, Kuminga, 2 first-round picks or something in that ballpark, because we got to make the numbers work, would that be a good offer?
I don't think that they would get Wiggins and Kuminga. Just
right.
the
That's
way
true.
the money
The
works. But,
right.
but I think that, to your point, I think Golden State is one to watch. I don't think that they want to get in the way of 2026 flexibility, and they'd love to get a pick in this upcoming draft. And so far, Golden State has those two things in certain ways. So we'll see. I also think that you're on to something that probably a team kind of like Milwaukee came out of nowhere for Dame. There's going to be likely one team. All it takes is one, like they say, to kind of up the ante here. So that's where I just think there's a lot of time between 12/26 and February 6th.
Well, we just devoted 55 minutes to this. I said we do a quick 20-minute podcast. So obviously no chance of that happening. Lots to talk about. All right. Follow Off the Floor. We'll try to give you updates in between. And, maybe I'll be wrong on this and they will be moved to act. At this point, I think their course of action is going to be take it to the off season, let them opt out, and then figure it out then. And this idea again that they don't have other plans. They have plan A, B, C, D, F. They know what all the possibilities are that could happen here, but a lot of it is, and this has been the case during the Jimmy Butler era, and that's what I try to make it. A lot of it is not in their control. It's just not. Just like the Dame situation was not in their control. There's got to be another team that finds Jimmy Butler important enough at this stage, at age 35, the piece that's going to get them over the finish line if he's engaged, active, and here's the other thing, healthy. And right now we're still talking about Jimmy Butler, whether it's a stomach ailment, an ankle thing that's being hid, I don't know, okay? But we know he's had problems with the ankle. He's not healthy enough to help the Miami Heat on the floor. And if that's the case, is he going to be healthy enough to help another team at the max that they're going to give up significant assets to go get him and take a flyer on the fact that he's going to be happier with them than he was with an organization with which he got to the finals for the first 2 times of his career? We'll see. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.